So yes, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for coming to our August TELedvisors webinar, which is called Designing AI Learning Agents. So I'm really thrilled to be joined today by Joanne Hinitt, Matthew Clemson, and Michael McAuley. My name is Antony Tibbs, and I'm the WA rep for the TELedvisors. So if you are unfamiliar with the TELedvisors, we are a special interest group as part of the ASCALite organization. So our members are mostly third space practitioners, so learning designers, learning technologists, that kind of thing. But I think we have a lot of other guests joining us from all around. So welcome one and all. It's really great to see you all. We actually have a pretty action-packed agenda for you today. We've got our four presenters will be sharing different examples of AI learning agents, along with practical tips for designing them and using them with learners. So we really hope you enjoy the webinar. Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping. So as I mentioned, this session is being recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording on YouTube on the TELedvisors channel. Please post your questions in the chat as we go along. And it might be the presenters might be able to respond in the chat, or we'll circle back to those at the end. We have some time for questions at the end, time permitting. And the wonderful Sharon, who's one of my fellow TELedvisor conveners, will be also helping to monitor the chat and that kind of thing. So yeah, thank you very much. Okay, I think it's good to get stuck in now. And I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, Joe.
All right, thanks, Anthony. And hi, everyone. My name is Joanne Hinitt, and I'm a lecturer and researcher in occupational therapy at the University of Sydney. Thanks for having me here today, and I'm excited to share with you Mrs. S, who is an AI agent that I created with the support of some human colleagues, Danny Liu and Kriya Coleman. So it's make sure they're working. Yeah, great. All right, so who or what is Mrs. S? She is a generative AI chatbot kindergarten teacher, and she was built using a tool called Cogniti. She was created for student learning and engagement, specifically for a workshop class activity. What was the activity? For a bit of context, it was with a second-year undergraduate occupational therapy student group, and it was in a unit of study about how to work as an occupational therapist within the school context, so working with school students and their teachers. The activity centered around a child named Jake, who was he just started kindergarten, his first year of schooling in New South Wales. We call it kindergarten, but he was having some difficulties with handwriting. So the students worked in groups to develop occupational therapy plans and strategies to help and support Jake at school. And then they presented their plans to Jake's teacher, Mrs. S, as they might in occupational therapy practice. So in this way, it simulated collaboration and communication and worked on these skills between occupational therapists and classroom teachers. Stopped working. Okay, great. So the simulation of the communication was set up as a role play with the Cogniti AI chatbot teacher, Mrs. S. So in this way, students could receive real-world, real-time feedback, and they could make adjustments and respond, to their communication in the moment and have another try. So I've got a little screenshot there, at the start of a conversation. Hi, do you have time to talk about Jake? And then, of course, she's always open to discussing her students. Just move your mouse, Anthony. Great. So I've mentioned Cogniti a few times already. So just a little bit of a sidebar on what is Cogniti. It is a self-serve generative AI platform for teachers developed at the University of Sydney to support teaching and learning. and it lets us teachers build customized chatbot agents that can be given specific instructions to act in specific ways that we can manipulate to support student learning across various contexts and situations. Now, I do realize that this can be done in other AI platforms, but the advantages and the reasons that I particularly like Cogniti, I am a bit biased, but the things that highlight for me are that there's no need for staff or students to create separate accounts with the external companies. It's all using the university accounts, and any access and costs, therefore, are covered by the uni. And it can be embedded directly into the LMS, which you'll see later, the learning management system. So the access is pretty seamless. Also, it's hosted on private, secure Microsoft Azure services, for those that like the background stuff in that. So it's not connected with OpenAI servers. So creating Mrs. S, I want to make the point that it was super fun, really, really fun to create her and make her just the way I wanted for the student learning and the experience that I wanted them to have. It was also pretty straightforward once I knew what I was doing. The biggest trap was probably getting a bit carried away. And also, maybe the most important was that it didn't actually take all that long. With Danny and Kria's support, I was able to redesign the entire workshop, including the Mrs. S bit, so it was bigger than just this bit, in under 2 weeks. And this is when Cogniti and AI and all of this stuff was super new too, so I didn't really know what I was doing. So the prompting in the background is done through a system message in Cogniti. So this isn't shown to the users, in this case, the students. And what I've learned, I didn't know at the time, but I do know now, I'm sure Danny did, who helped me build Mrs. S, was that a good system message will involve the role, the user, the task, and any other information or resources that are helpful to get it to act the way you want. So I told Mrs. S, these are screenshots from the back end of Cogniti, to act as a busy primary school teacher teaching in a kindergarten class. And her primary focus is to educate and ensure the well-being of her students. And she likes collaboration, she's open to suggestions, and she particularly likes suggestions that will benefit the whole class. The user in this case, although it was an occupational therapy student, the user we put as an occupational therapist, and this is an actual tweak that we put later because they were role-playing being real therapists, and it was actually impacting on the output that she was giving, calling them the students. So we tweaked that prompt. And then important to tell her what she had to do, so it was to interact and have a conversation with the occupational therapist. She's time poor, she's mindful of those inclusive practices, and she wants the best for all her students. The other benefit of Cogniti is that we can give some other information. So we provided some contextual things that she needed to know, such as the curriculum for her class that she was teaching, and policies and guidelines around inclusive education and support for that. The really big bit of building Mrs. S was providing the feedback that I wanted her to give and that I wanted the students to get as part of their learning. So I gave her a list of the common mistakes that novice occupational therapists and student occupational therapists often make when they're collaborating and talking with teachers. And I built in what I called pushbacks, asking her to challenge the user if they did certain things. So I've got a few examples here. So if the user, the occupational therapist, was using jargon or terms that a teacher may not understand, or if they didn't provide adequate rationale or explanations. So, you know, they said, what about a finger gym? And she said, well, that's quite intriguing, but I'm not quite familiar with that. Could you please provide some more details? So another thing was if they recommended strategies that weren't necessarily suitable for a whole class or were too labor intensive for a teacher. So in this one, I was thinking you could get him to do finger warm-up exercises before he does any handwriting. And then she says, oh, that sounds useful. She's always very encouraging. Can you describe these? And also how long do they take? And you know, making sure that she can benefit all the students in her class. So she really did have that focus. And then another thing was being able to adequately summarize and integrate evidence into the conversation and their reasoning. So she asked for some evidence about why she should be using Therapody. And the student said, here's the link to this publication. So she politely thanked them and said, however, she's very busy and she doesn't have time to read the entire article. So could you summarize that? Sidebar point, this article isn't actually about using Therapody for handwriting. It's about sensory regulation. So they didn't quite get it right on that one either. But having the benefit of being able to look back at the conversations can help with that. So tip and trick is to test and tweak the prompting, but not too much. It's never going to be perfect. People aren't perfect either. So when I say test and tweak, it was, having a go, trying to act like the students would and putting it in and seeing what she put back. So for example, some of the things we had to tweak, she was very AI speak initially. So, with a big sort of context of ChatGPT style rather than conversational tone that she was putting back out. So we gave her the additional instructions to use the conversational tone, be terse, be concise, and only ask one question at a time. And she was also super agreeable. So rather than getting, just agreeing with what the student said, which could have been anything, was getting her to engage in more of a conversation. So one of the key things in using her with the class was I was super aware of my responsibility to present it ethically and responsible use. So I built in a pre-workshop activity with some videos and activities that they had to do, introducing some ethical and professional ideas around using AI, particularly in occupational therapy. And I also did an anonymous survey through Menti just to get a vibe of where they were at with their AI use. And the key theme running through all of that was that AI is here to stay. We really sort of don't know how it's going to be used in professional practice, but we do know that we need to use it ethically and responsibly, both at uni and in real life, in practice. And so some of the things I implemented were nothing new than ordinarily, that we use in practice. So during the activity, being really clear about what the outcome was, why we were using the AI and what it was for. So what the learning outcomes were, and being really specific about what they had to do. So step-by-step instructions. As I said, they accessed it through Canvas, so it was really seamless. They had a landing page which had sort of the blurb of what it was. This has been updated since the initial use as we've used Cogniti more, but so they knew what Cogniti was and how the LMS and the chat worked. It looks like a regular sort of chat with a large language model. And I do have an example of a conversation, but I might flick through that because I'm aware of the time. And I think you're all aware of the to and fro that a large language model or ChatGPT will do. So the impact, it was a really cool class. There was a lot of engagement, which for anyone, when you put all the time and effort into it, is always a great thing. They were actually doing what I asked them to do. And I think and from the feedback, it allowed more of a deeper and authentic learning experience. So they were able to have a safe place, interacting, see how a teacher might respond to what they're asking them to do, and then adapt what they were saying back to her in real time and see how that played out. Some of the things they gave in the feedback at the end of the class. One of the students said they're really surprised with how well she responded and came up with the ideas. And this is my favorite, that it's such an awesome way to practice talking with clients and parents, etc., in an appropriate way, because that is exactly what I was after. Very quickly, what next? We've got Mrs. S 2.0 coming up. I did consider using the speech interaction that we can now do. It's still a bit experimental in Cogniti, but it's available. But I decided not to for various reasons. Being in the classroom, I want the students to continue working in groups, and I feel like they can edit and think about what they're going to say back to her if they're typing and writing and collaborate a bit more with each other on that. I have added some prompts about pushing back if students don't interact professionally with her. There were a few cheeky things in the transcripts, and also then just tweak and refine some of the prompting around those learning experiences. I'm completely out of time. Thanks for listening. If you do have questions or want to talk some more, there's my details. Thanks.
That was awesome. Thanks so much, Joe. Really great. So I can see there's some questions in the chat, but we're going to do questions at the end. So I'll be handing over to our next speaker, who is Matt Clemson.
I think I have control of the slides now. Thanks, Antony. Welcome, everyone. My name's Matt Clemson, and I'm from the University of Sydney. And today I'm going to talk to you about Dr. Metabolism, who I've engaged to help me to teach our many hundreds of students in second year biochemistry and guide them through learning all of human metabolism, which can be quite tricky. So not quite as creative as the bot that Joanne just introduced us to. This use case is much more straightforward, but it turns out, it did turn out to be really popular with our students. And as you can probably understand, human metabolism is quite complicated, and the type of metabolism we try to teach is molecular biology. It's at a molecular level. So the analogy of Google Maps, we're sort of zoomed into this level of detail. For that reason, of course, we can't cover all of this, and we don't expect students to try to learn all of this. But we do focus on some of the key central pathways that everyone consumes some sugar and some fat and some protein, and we all need to occasionally build some protein, fats, and store away some sugars to use later on. So importantly, we want students not to try and rote learn all of this. We want them to really start to dig down deeper and to understand how everything is linked together, everything is interconnected, and everything is regulated at a fairly high level. So this is the context. The background is we're teaching second year students biochemistry and molecular biology. It's a really large unit of study here at the University of Sydney, because you can imagine so many different disciplines need to know the basics of biochemistry and DNA and RNA and how things work in living organisms. So we have around this is semester 1 of this year, we had 728 students. And every semester, without fail, we tend to get around 1,000 questions on our student discussion board. And we try to be very active on that discussion board to encourage students to come there to ask their questions. And Alice and I co-coordinate this unit of study. And you can see that we're kept quite busy answering student questions over semester, about 1,000 questions and an additional 1,100 or so follow-up comments with the back and forth with our students. And you can see we get somewhere near about 250,000 views on our discussion board each semester. So it keeps us very busy. For that reason, I thought, wouldn't it be great when students are studying, I can't always be there 24/7 to answer their questions. And especially if they're in the middle of studying a topic, they don't want to wait 4 hours or 3 hours until I'm out of class or until the next day to answer that pressing question. So that's why Dr. Metabolism was originally created, that students could go there as a secondary source of information that I felt was relatively reliable. And for someone who's learning this information for the first time, searching with Google or traditional methods of trying to dig out this information, it can be difficult for novice students to determine what information to use and what information to reject and what's relevant and what's pitched at the right level for their study. So Dr. Metabolism's a bit better at doing that than a standard Google search. The initial prompt that I wrote, well, first of all, it's embedded in the LMS. The welcome message is pretty much how I would act on that discussion board. I'm approachable. Don't be worried about asking a silly question. Just ask as many questions as you want. You're here to learn and I'm here to teach. Let's do the best that we can. And then the original system prompt I came up with was really, again, just trying to replicate my behavior. I said, you're a professor who's expert in biochemistry and metabolic pathways. You understand completely how all of this is controlled and regulated. And you want your students to understand how these controls change under different circumstances. And don't just directly give answers, but encourage them to understand why and how everything is regulated. And surprisingly, that worked really, really well as almost the first iteration of Dr. Metabolism. And I was pretty happy with what it was outputting. I was asked today to give some insight into writing a good system message, and I'm thankful that Joanne gave a really good introduction on what to include in one of these, because it can be a bit tricky. And exactly as Joanne said, the key take home is just to keep testing and changing and testing again and change one thing at a time. Be scientific about it, and then go back and do enough testing that you can actually see what that change has enacted within the bot, and then go back and change again. So changing one thing at a time. But the essential elements, Danny Liu at the University of Sydney within this Cogniti website in the help documents has provided some really simple and easy guidance on how to do these things. Give it a role, tell the bot how to act. Mine is told to act like a university professor, but it doesn't need to be. Give it a task and tell it what to do. So your role is to help the user. In our case, students are the users of this technology. So that's how we refer to them when we're writing the system message, and then tell it the parameters within which to work. OpenAI's advice for writing prompts is also quite helpful if you're not sure about the language you're using when you're writing these things. Danny's also more recently built in a USyd to read through your system prompt and to give you feedback on that. So I've given that a few goes. You can see how the original test, you want users to understand how the controls change under different circumstances. This is suggested to say your task is to help the user to understand. So using this language around the user, the task, and the parameters within the AI, what the AI should work, I think are really helpful, and they do produce better results. Don't just give direct answers. This has been reworded a bit to encourage more prompting questions. It's interesting how even the behavior of the bot, and I'm sure it's to do with the GPT model, changes a little bit over time. So just in the 3 months of semester one, I could see at the beginning it was always finishing a completion, an AI completion with a question back to the student, but then that started to disappear towards the end of semester, and I needed to sort of reinforce to the bot, make sure that you're asking questions back to the students. On that note, too many questions really annoyed the heck out of our students. So we want a conversation, but they're there to gather information. So they're not there to engage in a conversation with the bot, as far as my use case is concerned within my context. And so don't make it too difficult for students to get in there and learn, because that's what they're trying to do, and that's what we want them to do. So I changed that up to include one prompting question. And that seems to have helped. I fed the Cogniti bot with the resources directly from our LMS. So Cogniti has built in, you can just select pages, assignments, rubrics, and any files that are stored in the Files tab of Canvas. You can select to feed straight into the resources, or you could even just create your own PDFs and feed those in as resources. You can upload your own resources. Having it hosted in our Canvas site, of course, means if the Canvas site changes, so do those resources for the bot. So I think that's really important. Very brief note on how Cogniti uses those resources it will render everything down to straight text. So, and it will do a search of those resources, finds the context within that sort of user prompt. So students go in, ask a question, it searches my resources for the answer to that question, pulls out some snippets and combines that with the user prompt to send up to the large language model and produce its completion. A couple of quick notes: too many resources slowed it down way too much. I immediately, the novice user says, just give it everything. Tell it to know every single assignment, every single bit of metabolism, all of the notes we've given students. Too much. So I slowed it down too much, and I had to pull back and just give it the 15, 16 lectures and assignments and rubrics, which turned out to be very helpful for students. A lot on the internet about the temperature and how you should set the temperature of these bots. Mine's set to 0.5, which at a low temperature means to make the outputs more deterministic, to be more factual, whereas turning the temperature up tends to be more creative and flamboyant with its responses. I found some people turn these down to 0. I think that does tend towards more hallucinations if you're trying to tell it to be very factual, and not as good for engaging in a conversation with students. So 0.5 turned out to be the sweet spot for me. And that's in GPT-4 Turbo now, is one of the later models. Thankfully, I work at the University of Sydney, where they've co-designed, thanks Antony, they've co-designed a help page for students on using AI in their study. And this was our educational innovation team at the university, and students got together and wrote these resources. They basically built a Canvas page telling students how they can use AI for their assessments, how they can use it to help with the creative process, how they can use it to gather feedback on their work, and really, really good ethical guidance for how to engage with AI in their study. And I think that's really helpful. Now, metabolism's not quite as organised as Dr. Newclake Alice, who comes in for the second half of semester to teach about DNA and RNA. And Alice, within our own Canvas site, built lots of really helpful guides for students on how to engage with our bots and how to write good prompts, and even how to use Bloom's taxonomy to write some good practice questions for exams and things. And Alice even included Bloom's taxonomy in the system prompt for her bot. So really helpful guidance there. Scaffolding for students. We did get students to write some reflective statements about how they used AI. The key assessment for us was this 10% thing, which was take home and do an essay, old style assessment, but going and finding peer-reviewed resources. And we knew that that was really open to AI, just go and do it in 5 minutes. And so we made students reflect on that, and I encouraged them to use our bots to do those assignments or to help with those assignments, because then we could sort of gauge how students were interacting with the bots and their assessment tasks. I couldn't do a talk without putting an AI-generated image in here. So here's our stats. That one was with Adobe Firefly. I notice I haven't put my reference there. Just in those sort of 12 weeks of semester one, we had 3,500 conversations. That included 31,000 prompts and answers, so about 16,000 student prompts and 16,000 AI responses. Most student conversations were about 9 back and forth in length, so that they are holding conversations. It's not as transactional as a Google search query. How this was really helpful for us was seeing what they were asking about. Obviously, when assessments rolled around, a lot of the questions were about those assessment tasks. But I can happily say that I think some of us are worrying too much about academic integrity. I would say more than 95% of these prompts were students wanting to learn more. They weren't trying to get the AI to do their work. They might be going elsewhere to get some of that, but 95% of these were students they want to learn. they've got a motivation to understand this stuff. We did have a couple of just quick questionnaires in there for students. Did you find it helpful? Should it be used in other courses? Yes, and yes, and yes. And then a quick open text, well, actually 3 open text boxes. What were the best aspects? What would you improve? And anything else you want to tell us? And that's what students said. And you can see there was a lot of love. There was more love for Dr. Metabolism than there was for the original Dr. Matt, the human one. And I'm really happy with that. I'm glad that students got in there, gave it a go. And yeah, I'm glad that I was brave enough to just hit the go button at one point and say, let's see. I wasn't too afraid of the hallucinations and other things that might go wrong. There's a QR code. You need to log in. If you're a university, log in with your AAF, or you can also use Microsoft or Google to go and talk to Dr. Matt if you want.
That's awesome. Thank you, Matt. That was really great. Okay. So I'd like to say that actually at ECU where I work, we've also just started a Cogniti trial. So we're a little bit behind Joe and Matt there with this amazing bots that they've created, but hopefully we'll be able to share some of these agents in the future. But today I actually wanted to share something that was created using custom GPT. So it's a slightly different kind of learning interaction than the agents that we've seen so far. So basically, what I'll be talking about is the ethical scenario activity GPT. So as part of my role, I've been helping out with doing AI literacy workshops for staff across the university. And this particular GPT was created in OpenAI's ChatGPT custom GPT feature, which is a paid feature. And we used it in some workshops. So I'll just show you what it looks like. So it's got a slightly different interface. Most people are probably familiar with ChatGPT. And when the activity starts, you hit the begin the activity button, and basically it introduces itself, shares a couple of links relevant to the university, and then you say, well, I'm ready for my first scenario, and then it prints out a scenario. So as you can see, it gives a little bit of context and follows up with a few questions, some of which specifically relate to some of the ethical principles at ECU. When you're ready, you can hit next. So I think you get the idea. So in terms of the context, as I mentioned, this was a GPT or an AI learning activity that was used in a staff development workshop called AI and Ethics. It was the 4th in a series of 4 called Explore AI. So the participants, we've had academic and professional staff from across the institution attend. It's been used in about 4 or 5 times, both online and face-to-face. And the aim of this particular activity is really to get staff a chance to talk about lots of different ethical scenarios around using AI in education, and especially with reference to ECU's ethical principles for AI. So in the activity, how it runs in the workshop is we have a starting scenario that we present and we talk about. Then the link to the GPT is shared. Then, as we saw in the previous slide, the AI generates scenario and some questions. Then the idea is the humans talk about it in pairs, have a discussion. When they're ready, they ask the AI for another one. This repeats as long as there's time available, and then come back together to debrief as a group. So what we found is that really did generate a lot of conversation. And I just want to talk a little bit about the prompt and how this actually works, because you saw that it generates these different scenarios. They're actually different every time, with partially randomized. But in the beginning, I started with more of a basic prompt structure. So Joe and Matt have actually shared some really great advice for what should be included in a prompt. The Ethan Mollick and Violet Mollick, they're other people that are really worth following in this space in terms of getting advice for prompting. And there's this paper that I strongly recommend you have a look at, where they have a sort of a structure that they suggest, which is pretty similar to the ones we saw before, but it also includes this idea of the narrative, so you can actually take learners through a couple of steps. So in the beginning, the ethical scenario, I really just said, you're a facilitator. I want you to give some ethical scenarios related to higher education and AI. And then, after you've done a few, wrap up and, give them, ask for some feedback. But this basic prompt, there was actually quite a few issues with it. So the first problem was that the scenarios the AI was making up, it was just drawing from its training data. So they're very generic. They were often not really closely related to learning and teaching. I also found that the variation in the scenarios, sometimes they'd be really long, sometimes they'd be short, they wouldn't include questions. So really without a lot of guidance, it was coming up with all kinds of stuff. So it was really too variable. In the beginning as well, I asked it to personalize. So it would say, welcome to the activity. What are your names and what is your job role? So, you would say, hi, I'm Antony. I'm a librarian. What I discovered was that every single scenario, every person in the scenario would be called Antony and they would be a librarian, whether the scenario was anything to do with the library or not. So it was really trying to mash that together. So it actually took that personalization out because it didn't really support the learning activity. So even though AI can personalize, in this case, it was a bit of a red herring. Also, I mentioned earlier as well, the variation in the language. It would always start the scenario in a different, the activity in a different way, sometimes well, sometimes not so well. So these were a few different challenges with the prompt in the beginning. So I added some extra elements that really addressed a lot of these issues. So these were added in just above the narrative. So the extra elements were scenario guidelines. So actually giving the AI principles for quality scenarios. So things like make sure that each scenario has got diversity. So we're seeing different kinds of characters and genders and so on, and lots of other advice about what makes a good scenario. Then in order to make it more personalized to ECU and also some of the stories that I'd seen in the news and had heard about in terms of what's possible with AI in education, actually giving it a list of scenarios, but they were pretty minimal. This is a real example, using generative AI image creation tools in class that have been trained on artwork added to training data without artist consent. So that's all that was added in terms of a scenario idea. Then an example scenario, which was handwritten by me, that had sort of 2 paragraphs, a header, and questions of the kinds of things that I wanted, open-ended questions that I wanted it to ask. And then finally, I included the 5 ethical principles for ECU so that it could include those in the answers. And this actually produced much more reliable scenarios that were really addressed quite a few of those issues. There's a couple of other tips and tricks that I'd like to share. So I mentioned earlier that if you have this kind of activity where you want them to guide through a couple of steps, I didn't want too much randomization at the beginning. If you give your AI quotation marks and say this, it will reproduce that text verbatim every time. So you can make the beginning or a certain step in the activity very consistent. It will always say the same thing at that particular time. So that's quite useful. You can also include markdown link formatting. So this is just a bit of a style thing, but it means that instead of seeing long, ugly links, it actually hides the links under text. So you can make a better visual presentation. The other thing is to also use link shorteners. So I've used Bitly here, which is a free tool, but there's a couple of reasons it's a good idea to use the link shorteners, because as you know, the AI will print out what it's saying as it goes. If you have a really long link, it will they'll see that very long link appear before it gets covered up. So this makes it very difficult to even see that. The other thing as well is that in the prompt, every character counts. So actually shortening this data down actually is better for the kind of overall prompt count, which I'll show you in a second. If I wasn't using this, I would have hit the limit. The other thing was using variables. So this is the scenario randomizer. So this is the bit of prompting that allows it to use all of that different information I gave to generate a scenario on a particular pattern quite consistently every time. And it's actually really quite straightforward. So it just says, generate a new scenario based on one randomly selected from the suggested scenario topic. So that's that list higher up in the prompt. Follow the instructions in the scenario guidelines. So that's all the advice about what a good scenario should be like, and the structure and style of the example. And that's it. So the great thing about these variables is you can keep your instructions really short, but then it's really easy to update. You can go and add a new scenario, and it's just as easy as adding in a couple of sentences. We actually added 2 just this week on some new news stories. You might have heard there was one where some people were using Copilot to generate scenarios for a training activity, and Copilot included real people in what was supposed to be a fictional scenario. So that's quite an interesting ethical situation. So it's really easy just to add that in. The other thing is the loop instructions. So this is just getting it to kind of do that over and over again and say when to stop. So it just says, keep doing this, keep doing 2.1 until they say they're done. I've also added so that when it hits the end of the 12 scenarios, it stops as well, but you could easily get it to keep going. Now, the really interesting thing about this is that even though I've given it an example to reference, I've given it lots of guidance about what makes a good scenario, because these AIs are they're based on randomization and probabilities, and they start slightly differently each time, your scenarios will always be similar, but they'll never be exactly the same. So another scenario topic is that a professor is suspicious of a student using generative AI to complete an assignment. They decide to upload it to a free AI detector software to check if it was written by a human. So of course, this is inspired by a real situation that an academic might find themselves in if they were not sure about whether it's AI or not. And there's quite a few issues around that. You can see that as you use the scenario, it's the same scenario, but it's rewritten all in very different ways, different characters, different numbers of questions. Sometimes it decides to put a heading. I'm not sure why. It just decides to sometimes. Usually it doesn't. So you'll always get a little bit of variation. And what I've noticed is that sometimes the scenarios are like really good and sometimes not so good. They have something a little bit strange in them that wouldn't be quite so authentic. But so there's a lot of variation in the quality of the scenarios that get generated by this. So that's something to keep in mind. I think for this particular activity, because they're invented and the priority is really to get staff, give them a scenario without too much detail, but some kind of ethical decision in it. And the point is to get the staff to talk about it. It doesn't really matter so much that there's this kind of variation in the agent, but if you're using this kind of tool to make scenarios and that it matters more about consistency, that's something to be aware of. So in terms of the results, so the advantages of this kind of semi-randomized scenario approach is that I did write one scenario exactly how I wanted in the beginning, but adding new scenarios is just as easy as writing that simple sentence. We saw a couple of examples so far, so it's really easy to add new scenarios. And also, it saves me a lot of time because I don't have to sit there and think, okay, well, what is this person going to be called? I don't have to come up with all the details. The AI does a really wonderful job of really coming up with all of those details. So, it's a generative model, so it's really leveraging that capability. But in terms of the guidance I'm giving it is giving it those specific scenarios. So I can do things like mention Copilot, so that you should talk about Copilot in this particular scenario, and it will do that. So it really mitigates that problem of earlier, where if you just let the AI come up with any old scenario it wants to, they're very generic. So for me, it hits a really nice balance between the two. But there are limitations. Really, it just doesn't follow the instructions all the time. It's told very clearly, you always need to randomize the order and don't repeat them. Sometimes it will just not randomize them, or sometimes it will just repeat one of the scenarios for no particular reason. So again, I think that's part of this randomization. It's not 100% consistent. The other issue, this is more specific to ChatGPT, is that the system prompt in ChatGPT can only be 8,000 characters. And my prompt at the moment just so happens to be a tiny bit under that. So if I wanted to add any more to this scenario, I would probably run out of words, couldn't add any more instructions. I'd have to take some stuff out. So that's something that's quite interesting, that it's sort of like maybe taking it to the limit of what I can do with this particular activity in this particular way. And of course, even something like Cogniti, if you add a super long system prompt, it also can affect performance as well, which is probably why OpenAI have added this hard limit. So yeah, it's something, your prompts can be quite sophisticated, but the more you add in there, it can actually, you're going to hit that limit. The other main issue with using ChatGPT, of course, is that to use a custom GPT, you have to use it as much as you want, you'll need a paid account. At the moment, you can use it for free, but you're going to hit that limit really quickly. When we initially rolled out this custom GPT for the workshops, the participants in the workshops all had access to a paid ChatGPT account as part of a trial process. And so that wasn't really a concern. But now that we're widening the workshop participation to more staff, this really becomes a bit of an issue, and why something like Cogniti is really so much better for some of the reasons that Joanne and Matt mentioned, in terms of everybody can access at the institution. So yeah, that's quite interesting. However, it's been a pretty effective scenario otherwise. Yeah, so thank you. If you'd like to have a go, try it yourself. You can follow the link there, and yeah, feel free to get in touch. Okay, so thanks everyone. I will now be handing over to our final speaker, who is Michael. So just a little bit of an intro for this one. At ECU, we have we have a lot of at ECU, we have made Copilot available for everybody. So this is staff and students have access to Copilot. But of course, a really big limitation of this is that it doesn't have the system prompt feature that Cogniti has or that ChatGPT has. So you can't really design the learning agents in the same way. But Michael actually came up with a pretty ingenious, innovative technique to send prompts to Copilot. So I asked him to share that today. So I'm going to be handing over now to Michael to continue. Thanks, Michael.
All right. So, good. I have control. Yay. All right. Sorry, everyone. Okay. Yes. My name is Michael McAuley. I'm a learning advisor here at ECU. And today I'm going to present to you what is really a very simple new way to approach the integration of Copilot into your web pages, any web pages, including your LMSs, etc. Spoiler alert, this is what's I'm going to show you. It is a prompt that can be either in a button format or in a URL that sends directly to Copilot. It sends the prompt directly to Copilot and opens Copilot when the prompt is sent. And so it has some limitations, which I'll talk about. The prompt is embedded in the URL, and as I mentioned, it opens when Copilot opens. What is hopefully you'll see that this to be a bit of a powerful tool because it can allow educators to link lessons and to guide students directly within their learning pages, basically, and allows them to scaffold and differentiate learning more easily, and to embed AI and formative games developed by AI directly into the websites, basically. Okay, so spoiler, okay, it is very simple to do. So here is an example at the basic level. It sends off to the free version of Bing. Okay, so Bing Chat is the basic URL prompt. Then playing around and experimenting a lot with Bing Chat and with Bing Search, I identified two get variables, which are important in the URL that's encoded. The Q variable, which contains the prompt itself, which is should be encoded to be sent to Bing, and the command send query equals 1. So the send query equals 1 instructs it to open when it receives the URL and to process the prompt. So it straight away will respond to the prompt that is sent. As I mentioned, I also developed it into button format, but as you can see there, the URL is exactly the same in the button format as it is in the simple link format. Now, and the rest of it is aesthetics. Now, I do prefer the button format simply because it more clearly identifies the function aspect of generative AI rather than the simple navigation function, which is everybody's used to with links. So because of that, I tend towards the button, but like I said, it's a personal preference, it's aesthetics. It's the same URL that it's sent to in both cases. All right, some limitations. Now, there are limitations in using this technique. One of the major limitations is the URL length, okay? The prompt can't be longer than the URL length because it's included in the URL. That URL length, okay, the maximum URL length is set by actually the browsers. So when you look at Edge or Chrome, then the maximum length for their URLs is 2,038 characters. If you have a look at the URL itself, there's 44 non-prompt characters in it. So that leaves you about 2,000 characters, which is you're able to encode into a prompt that can be sent to Copilot and opens up when you click it. Now, that is enough to actually provide some guide rails, all right, within the prompt, and you can get it to do, well, I've been able to get it to do most things, and I'll show you some examples in a second. There are security issues. Now, the prompt is actually visible in the bar, so because the prompt is visible in the bar and also visible in Copilot, it's not so good for summative tasks, for example, but it's quite useful for formative tasks. And you can get the Copilot and the AI to develop some fun games and things like that that can help the students along the way. There's also the security measure of server-side validation, because to avoid injection attacks, basically, where code is placed inside a URL, most servers will have validation that they check any URL that is sent to them before they process it. Now, I haven't actually run into this problem, but I'm pretty sure that if you started to include coding in your prompt, you might run up against it pretty quickly. But otherwise, it gets by, and anything you can send to, for example, Bing Search, you can send to Bing Chat. There is the issue of the difference between a completion and a chat. In the early days of OpenAI, there were and looking at the APIs, there was a big distinction between what is a completion, when you're sending simply a single completion, or when it's a chat process. Now, even though Copilot is a chat window and a chat process, the educator really has to place all of their instructions within the initial chat, within the initial prompt. There is the ability to, 2,000 characters is actually quite enough to put in some guide rails, but it all has to be in that initial prompt. And also, if you've done much prompt creation, if you've got a chat window, there is this facility to, in cooperation with the chat, to develop your prompt. But it all has to be in the initial prompt in this particular case. But once you do have a prompt that you quite like, then you can encode it, share it easily with your students as a link, and then they can go out and use it themselves in a guided way. You can guide their initial interaction with Copilot, for example. Okay. So next, so this becomes part of the advantages that I see. Firstly, the prompts are actually exposed. The whole prompt is exposed to students in the beginning when it's sent to Copilot. And this can be a good and bad thing. As I mentioned, it's not good for summative assessments, but it does help to support digital literacy because as the students are going, they see these prompts and it becomes more familiar to the students, the whole AI process, and can improve confidence by the students in this interaction, really, that you're sending them in a guided way. There's a greater emphasis in this format of the emphasis on the educator's guidance, and because they're smaller, lower level interactions, not really bots, but simply, prompts or controlled prompts that are sent. They're much more lower level AI interactions, and it can help to support scaffolding of individual tasks or individual parts within a task, and also differentiation for students where differentiation is needed for the learning of students. As far as knowledge goes, that is also a bit of an advantage because it's a simple completion. It has a much shallower learning curve because really, even today, when you're thinking about the bots, there is, and I'm sure other people agree, there is a level of, at least computer science logic that you have to be able to develop your bot and to be able to get it to do what you want. And so this has got a much shallower level that you can simply send off the questions. And it's also simplified prompt sharing. So you can include those links within a web page or directly related to the content that you might be interested in addressing or supporting, basically. Cost. Often cost is a question mark that people have as far as integrating AI and using it, etc. Obviously, fairly enough. This sends to the free version of ChatGPT ChatGPT. Oh, sorry, ChatGPT. I'll get to that in a minute. This sends to the free version of Copilot. Okay. And so free version of Copilot Bing, I've used it with without being signed in. If a student is signed in under Microsoft Enterprise, then they have advantage of the security that is provided under the commercial data protection by Microsoft. Otherwise, and also it works under if you've got a 365 license, though if you've got a 365 license, there's a little toggle at the top that you'll probably see that is whether you're searching web or work, it's got to be on web, otherwise then it falls over. The GTP, there's a GPT that I'll come to in a second, which I've created that allows you to encode these things. And as Antony mentioned, the GTPs, there's free license, and so you can interact with those for free as well. So as far as costs goes, from beginning to end, it's free. You can't complain too much about that, hopefully. All right, so some examples that are available on that page that I sent out, and I think I can drop it within the, sorry, I can, yeah. Okay, those examples. So what you can see there is that you've got for the additional information prompt. Now I've developed this prompt to have what is basically a variable in the middle there. Okay, so if I change that how our creative thinkers made, then it will respond on a different topic, but still go through the same process, of course. Same thing with the example prompt there of a multiple choice quiz. So if I change that quiz topic to be something different from how a creative thinker's made, simply changing that line will change what quizzes created by Copilot. And so these can be built easily into and scaffold the learning within the individual pages of your content management system, or even, if they're simply built into a normal HTML page that you share with your students in a lesson, that works as well. Okay, and another example, I think I've lost control, Antony. Sorry, can you flip over to the next page for me? Thanks. Okay, now I've got a list of example prompts that are up on that page, but one of my favorites, and I think probably the most powerful in general terms, is what I've called the variable prompt. And in this prompt, what I ask it first to do is to have a look at the text that I'm about to send it, have a look at the prompt that I'm about to send it, and then for anything that it sees in square brackets, ask me that question first. Then respond to the prompt as a whole. So, you probably, I'm sure everyone has seen the hundreds of different sort of suggested prompts that are out there on the internet, where everybody suggests that you can change this information and they put it into square brackets. Well, this prompt will activate all of those. So by simply changing one of those prompts and putting it into the end of this one, then what happens is that Copilot first asks you the question, sure, but then tell me this. Then I give it a piece of information that is relevant. Then it responds to that completed prompt. And so I'm sure that everyone's seen these prompts that used to be available all over the place, and there's just square brackets, your information in the square brackets. And so this makes it quite powerful because it can, like I said, activate any of those. And one more time, Antony, sorry. Okay, and now finishing off from me is I've created a GPT. I've created a GPT, and what this GPT will do is that if you've got any prompt, you can put it in. It'll create the link for you. It'll create, if you prefer it, a button. You've got to give it the text that you want to be on your button as a step there. But it'll create the prompt, check the length of it, the URL. URL just to make sure that it doesn't break that 2000 rule. And then if you want it, it will also create the button for you. And this can be for any prompt that you choose, really. So like it's different, as you probably can all see. This tool and this process is different from the bots. Bots are larger scale and able to do at a larger scale with more interaction and more iteration from the students. This is more what we would consider one shots or zero shots, actually, because everything has to be within that first prompt. There is the ability within that first prompt to create interaction, for example, 5 multiple choice quizzes. And as you'll see, if you have a look at the example, there's a simple Socratean tutor that is a choice there that can go through, and there's a few other things. There's a Gibbs analysis that will call to an outside page to find out what the hell is a Gibbs analysis and then give feedback on it. So there are a variety of ways that this simple tool, I think can be integrated within your lessons pretty easily and without hopefully too much of a steep learning curve.
Oh,
And
thanks, Michael. That's
me.
great. Sorry, we're just yeah, thanks so much. Awesome. Do I have control of my own computer now? Yeah, okay, well, thanks so much, Michael. That was really great. So that brings us to the end, and unfortunately, we don't seem to have a lot of time for questions, but I can see that the chat's been really very active, and hopefully, I think people have been answering as we go along as well, which is great. So yeah, Michael, if you could have a look and see if there's any questions for you might want to answer there. Yeah, so thanks once again, everyone, for coming. That was really fantastic. And thanks so much again to Matt, Joe, and Michael for presenting. It was really so many fantastic tips, great examples, really, really awesome. Thank you. And just going to plug a few things that we've got some exciting events coming up for TELedvisors. And actually was going to hand over to Colin, maybe if you want to speak to these ones a little bit, Colin.
Sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, it may be hard to match the excitement around this particular webinar, but I think everyone is dramatically impacted whenever your institution decides to change LMS. So that's something we are going to explore next month in our webinar on Thursday, the 26th of September at 12 midday Australian Eastern Standard Time with Michael Sankey, and I am currently organising other presenters. That's probably it for that one. And I'll just carry on because I'm here. Now, some of you may not be necessarily entirely aware of what the TELedvisors network is about and does, but we represent people working in what is referred to as the third space in tertiary education. So we kind of sit between academics and professional staff. So it's learning designers, educational technologists, academic developers, that whole kind of world. But it's a much broader world and encompasses, people working in libraries, people supporting research. Anyway, so we've got a major event happening in the second half of November and also on the 1st of December, which is the Third Space Symposium. If you just pop along to thirdspace-symposium.com or bit.ly, the address down there on the screen, you can find out everything that you need to know about this event, but it will be pretty amazing. And yeah, if you've got an interest in the third space, and particularly if you're part of it, we really want to hear as many voices as we can. Thanks, Antony.
That's great, Colin. Thanks so much. Yeah, really encourage everyone to check those out. Okay, well, I think apologies again for running out of time for questions there. But yeah, I just want to say one more time, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. We really hope you enjoyed it. And thanks again to the presenters. Thanks so much. Okay, take care, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.